Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 1,003 likes on this one. That would be pretty cool. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated, as I do post content just like this all of the time. There are like nearly 800 of these videos across my channel, so if you're at all interested, be sure to subscribe. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax. Enjoy this over 2 hours of horror stories with no mid-roll ads right after the ad break after this intro. There won't be any more after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. Neither of us knew what was waiting for us inside Max's candy bucket. We just brought it back home from trick-or-treating and unlocked the front door. The second I turned the knob, Max shot into the living room, holding his pumpkin-shaped candy bucket in both hands. He flipped it over, gave it a shake, and all his candy poured out onto the carpet. Then he tossed the bucket aside. "Mommy, Mommy," he screamed. "Can I eat my candy now?" I came in behind him laughing, because only a 5-year-old could get that pumped up about eating candy. "Thank you for asking. Go ahead." I sat beside him, crisscross applesauce, and watched. Max worked through the pile by opening a piece, tasting it, then either scrunching up his face or giggling in approval, before moving on to the next. It was adorable. Seeing him like that made me smile. But as I kept watching, the moment began to sour. See, I was a single mother. We lived off my income alone, and because I was just a waitress in a small cafe, money was tight. There were some days when I could only afford to feed Max and not myself. Whenever he asked why I wasn't eating, I'd say I already ate at the restaurant, which was a lie because even with my employee discount, those meals still cost money. My manager had even fired employees before for sneaking food without pay. I lied because I didn't want Max to worry. I think kids shouldn't have to worry about those kinds of things. They should be having fun, like Max was doing now. But while I watched him eat his candy, and I saw the happiness he got from what only strangers could give him, something twisted up inside me. I felt like a failure as a mother. Max noticed I wasn't eating any candy and piled several pieces in front of me. "No, honey," I said, putting them back on his pile. "These are all yours. Mommy doesn't want any." "Why not?" "Because I don't want to take any from you." Once I said that, a flicker of sadness moved in his eyes. He looked up at me, almost like he was beginning to understand something about me, like he'd had a realization, wise beyond his years. Broke my heart. "Okay," I said. "Just one. You choose." Max smiled. He hovered his little fingers over the pile, carefully weighing his options, and stalled over a Reese's peanut butter cup. He squeezed down and lifted. Underneath, the corner of something jabbed out. It looked like a small stack of paper. It looked glossy and even gleamed in the overhead light. Whatever it was, I could tell it wasn't candy. Did one of the neighbors put something in there by accident? I reached down and pulled at the corner, and out slid a stack of Polaroid pictures. There were 3 of them, stuck together with a rubber band. "What's this, Max?" Max didn't say anything. He watched curiously as I snapped off the rubber band and flipped the stack over. The first picture framed a residential home at night. An adult woman stood on the sidewalk with a hand on her hip, watching a much smaller person, most likely a child, approach the front door. The lighting was so dark I couldn't tell who they were, but in the child's hand, I could see them gripping onto something, like a pail or a bucket. Right then I got it. There was a parent watching her child go trick-or-treating. Yep, one of the neighbors must have put this in here by mistake. I wondered who it was. I flipped to the next picture. I actually recognized the subject in this one. It was my neighbor, Terry, standing at his open front door. Someone who was hidden just beneath the frame held up a bucket, and Terry, smiling warmly like always, dropped a few pieces of candy in. Something about that bucket caught my eye. I studied it, noticing its circular shape, and realized it was designed to look like a pumpkin. My eyes drifted over to Max's pumpkin-shaped bucket on the carpet. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't want to jump to any conclusions. I flipped to the final picture. It was a shot of an open window, taken from behind a bush. A few out-of-focus leaves dangled in the foreground, but in sharp focus, right in the center of the picture, was my son's smiling face. I was behind him, zipping up his costume. Just before we went trick-or-treating, we were standing inside this very room. "Max?" I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "Which house gave you these?" Max scrunched up his forehead while he thought. He shrugged. Then he reached for another piece of candy. I blocked his hand. "Stop. Don't eat any more of that." I stood, glanced around. I was beginning to panic. "How come?" "Because I said so. Don't ask questions right now." Max began to cry. I ran to the front door to check the lock. It was already set. Okay, I'd just taken my son trick-or-treating. Someone was following us. They took pictures of us, and then dropped those pictures inside his bucket. We only went around our neighborhood, so it had to be one of our neighbors who did it. Was this some kind of sick joke? Or was one of them really stalking us? What do I do? I looked past the living room into the kitchen. My phone was on the island counter. I raced over to it and dialed 911. It rang twice, then the operator answered. 911, what's your emergency? Yes, Max interrupted, tugging on my leg, crying for me to let him eat more candy. "Honey, I will buy you more candy, but Mommy is on the phone right." 911, the operator repeated. "Please state your emergency." "Yes, we need help, please. I think someone is stalking me." The operator took down my name, address, and details about what happened. 10 minutes later, 2 officers were at my house. One shone a flashlight around my property while the other one, a young, tall officer, came to the door. He introduced himself as Officer Dan and asked for the photos. "I'm Jenny, and this is all of them," I said, handing them over. He took them with a gloved hand and scanned over the first one. While I waited, I felt Max stir behind me. He was hiding behind my legs, peeking up at the officer. Officer Dan flipped to the second one, looked at it, then cleared his throat. "Who's the man here?" "That's my neighbor Terry, but it couldn't be him. He's a good man." "I'm sure he is," he said. He flipped to the final picture. He studied it, and as he drank in the details, the faint lines around his eyes sharpened. He looked down at Max, then up to me. "So what's going to happen now?" I said. My voice sounded more desperate than I had intended. "We're going to sweep the neighborhood. Even if we don't find anything, there will be an officer nearby to patrol every hour. Also, we'll speak with Mr. Terry, not because he's a suspect, but just in case he's seen any suspicious activity. Also, I see that he has a Ring camera. We'll check the footage on that as well. Now, ma'am." He took a glance behind me. "Is it just you two in the house?" "Yes," I said. "Just us. Is there somewhere else you can stay tonight? Maybe with friends or family?" There wasn't. All my friends were my husband's, and once he left me, so did they. I started to answer but was caught by surprise when tears welled in my eyes. Whether it was the stress of our situation, or just me being scared, I didn't know. I blinked them away before they could fall and shook my head. No, it's just us. He nodded. Well, there's a double tree down the road. Wouldn't be a bad idea for you guys to book a room tonight. Book a room? I don't even know how I'm going to feed Max tomorrow. Officer, that's not really an option for us. Officer Dan gave me this look then. Honestly, it wasn't so different from the one Max sometimes gave me. With Max, I always thought it was a normal sadness that kids feel when they don't get their way. But with the officer, there was something deeper. I think he actually felt sorry for me, and I never wanted that. I never wanted that from anybody. I felt embarrassed. Look, he said, pulling a pencil and notepad from his shirt pocket. This is my personal number. Doesn't matter what time. If you need anything at all, give me a call. I'll be close. Thank you, officer. Just Dan, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. Then he turned and left. I closed the door and rested my forehead on it. Mommy, Max said. What's happening? I shut my eyes. It's alright, sweetie. Mommy's just trying to fix a problem. That's all. We both got quiet. A few seconds passed. Will we be okay? I think so. Come on, let's get ready for bed. Sleep in Mommy's room tonight. I'll come tuck you in. Okay, Max said. He ran up the stairs without a care in the world. I put Officer Dan's number on speed dial. Then I checked every door and every window to make sure the house was totally locked down. Half an hour later, I tucked Max into my bed, kissed him goodnight, and closed the door behind me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Officer Dan. He told me the neighborhood was clear, but they'd keep a close watch. My heart sank. I had hoped they would have caught the guy, and we could put this whole mess behind us. All the same, I thanked the officer and told him good night. Sleep was out of the question. Instead, I'd fix a cup of coffee and sit up all night, and if I heard so much as a twig snap outside, I was calling the cops. I headed downstairs to start on the coffee. My chest tightened with anxiety. He was still out there. I just knew it. Probably even close by. What if he was standing outside the house at that very moment? I caught myself biting on a fingernail and stopped. That was a bad habit I'd developed when I was a kid, but nowadays, it only flared up during moments of high stress. I passed through the kitchen and opened the cabinet, fishing out both my Maxwell House coffee grounds and a filter. I loaded the filter, dumped in a few scoops, and hit brew. Then I stood there a moment, feeling myself wanting to cry again. Dang it, Jenny. Now is not the time to get emotional. You're the adult here. Hold it together. Something on the island countertop beside me shined in my periphery. I glanced over. Then I stared for a long time in disbelief, trying to make absolutely certain that my eyes weren't deceiving me. Sitting right there on the countertop was a fresh set of Polaroid pictures. That was impossible. I'd given the officer everything I had. Was I losing my mind? I reached out, almost scared to touch them, and gently picked them up. In the first picture, Max was hiding behind my legs while I spoke with Officer Dan. Only this shot wasn't taken through an open window. From outside the house, it was taken from behind us. From inside the house. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. There was no way an intruder could have entered the house and taken a picture with an officer standing right there. I flipped to the next one. This one was of me in my bedroom, tucking my son into bed, and the way it was shot looked like something only possible in a dream. It was captured from a bird's eye view, directly above our heads. A blade from the ceiling fan even cut into the edge of the frame. Because it was taken so close to the light, the shot was overexposed, which put a hazy kind of filter over it. This defied all logic. To get that picture, whoever or whatever took it would have to have been suspended from the ceiling. They would have to have manipulated themselves into an impossible angle, all without me or Max knowing. My hands were trembling now. The room was beginning to spin. Terrified now, I flipped to the final picture. It was of me, my back facing the camera, standing in my kitchen. I was looking down, studying something in my hands. Just like I was now, at this very moment. The shot was taken so close behind me. Whatever had taken it could have reached out and touched me. I needed to get Max out of the house right now. Click. Something snapped directly behind my head. Then the room was quiet again. My mind took a moment to register what it even was, but slowly a sick realization slithered up from the pit of my stomach. What I had just heard was the shutter of a Polaroid camera. The camera's inner mechanisms hummed as it worked to print out the picture. I froze. I stopped breathing. In a desperate attempt, I tried reasoning with the intruder. "What do you want from me?" I cried. I listened for a response, still holding the pictures in my trembling fingers. There was no reply. The picture finished printing, and whatever was behind me stood perfectly still. Several seconds ticked by. Was it waiting for me to turn around? Across the counter, against the back wall, was a block of kitchen knives. I wished they were closer, but they were way out of reach. Depending on what happened next, maybe I could get to them, but for now, I would have to turn and face whatever was behind me head on. One slow inch at a time, I turned my head, my heart pounding inside my chest. I expected to be stabbed or choked or grabbed at any second. I turned a little bit further, then shot a glance back. The kitchen was empty. I exhaled, but a new fear, much greater than before, exploded inside me. It's going to get Max. I dropped the pictures and shot around the counter and ripped out the biggest knife from the block. Then I dug out my phone and hit call on Officer Dan's contact. Call failed. I tapped the screen several more times. Call failed, call failed, call failed. I slammed it on the counter in a fit of anger. Of all the times for my phone to not work, of course it would be now. I had no other option. I'd have to run upstairs and get Max by myself. I moved through the downstairs with the knife aimed in front of me. I checked around every corner and every piece of furniture I passed. I sprinted up the stairs, then through the upstairs hallway toward my bedroom. I pushed the bedroom door open slowly, horrified that it had already beaten me there. Thankfully, Max was still under the covers, safe and sound. I peeled the blanket off him and scooped him up in my arms. "Mommy?" he said, rubbing his eyes. "Shh, we have to go. Stay quiet." He wrapped his arms around me and put his head on my shoulder. I crept over to the door and peeked into the hallway. Empty. I carried Max down the hall, toward the stairs. If we could just make it out the front door, I'd run straight to the neighbors and call the cops from there. Just a short trip down the stairs and through the living room. We could do it. When we neared the steps, I heard the worst noise imaginable. Footsteps pounding up the stairs. My mind entered into fight or flight mode. Should I attack? Give Max a chance to run? No, I can't leave him. He'd never get away. I backed up. To my right was my son's bedroom. I ducked inside and rushed to the closet. I inched open the door as quietly as I could, but still, it squealed on its hinges. We slid inside. There was barely enough space for both of us. I clicked the door shut and stood in front of Max, using my body as a shield. "Mommy, what are we doing?" I turned and cupped a hand over his mouth. Not another word. We listened. With each passing second, the footsteps grew closer, until they arrived at the bedroom door. Then they slowed to a nice and easy stroll and entered the room. Floorboards creaked under a shifting weight. Something paced across the room, from left to right, like it was searching for us. Once it reached the right wall, it stopped, then turned and moved toward the closet. I tightened my grip on the knife. A stream of adrenaline coursed through my veins, making my skin tingle. I fought hard to keep my mind clear and focused. If the door opened, I would take them by surprise. Hammer the blade down in one quick motion. It was all I had. It came right up to the door and stopped. The sound of our own breathing filled the closet. A floorboard creaked. Every nerve inside my body screamed. What is it doing? Why is it just standing there? Then a camera clicked. Through the gap under the door, a light flashed. Against all logic, all reason, it had taken a picture of the closet door. A deep, yet childlike laughter vibrated into the closet. The camera clicked again. It knew exactly where we were, and it was playing games. It was toying with us. Max's body trembled behind me, and a soft whimper escaped from his lips. I prepared myself. The door would open any moment, and it was up to me to save our lives. I raised the knife so I could swing it down right as the door opened. I held my breath. I listened as the handle jiggled and began to turn. The door swung open. I hacked the knife blindly in front of me. Officer Dan staggered backwards just in time. Whoa, whoa! I darted my eyes around the room looking for it, looking for blood. I was frantic. It's just me. It's just me. No one is here. I've got you. You're safe. No, we're not. It was just here. I heard... We have multiple officers searching your home. No one is here. I scanned the room again. There was no camera, no creature, no obvious threat. The stress of what had just occurred began weighing down on me. I lost my sense of balance and stumbled. Officer Dan caught me by the arm. He guided me towards Max's bed. As I sat down, Max darted out from the closet and jumped onto the bed and clung on to me. You called me, remember? Officer Dan said. But you didn't say anything, so you were afraid something had happened. We forced open the door. Then I heard you guys in here. Do you think he broke in? I know he did. There were footsteps. And there's more pictures. Just look on the counter. There are no signs of forced entry, Jenny. Officer Dan paused and glanced over at the closet door. He ran his palms together, then approached the bed. He took a seat beside us. You know, sometimes in high-stress situations, our minds produce things. Sounds, images, things like that aren't really there. It's perfectly normal, given your situation. It's possible that's all that happened. Don't talk to me like that, Dan. Don't talk to me like I'm crazy. I know what I saw, I know what I heard. You're a cop, not a therapist. Get off the bed. Once I'd snapped on him, Officer Dan had no more psychotherapeutic explanations for me. He stood and left us alone in the room. He left the house, in fact, but some of the other officers were kind enough to stay with us until morning. For the rest of the night, there were no more signs of the intruder. The next day, I applied for a credit card and checked us into a hotel. I also put that house on the market. A week later, someone bought it. I took the money and bought a new house in a completely different state. Even though the old one sold well under its value, I didn't care. As long as we left behind whatever was in there, we had all we needed. At Max's new school, I met a group of moms that I became friends with, and that made a huge improvement on my quality of life. For the first time in a long time, I had people who cared about me. These ladies checked up on me, came over for wine night, got me out of my house. They even introduced me to a great guy who I'm still dating. Max made some new friends of his own, and he seemed happy at his new school. For a while, things were pretty great. This morning, I put a note in Max's lunchbox, telling him how much I loved him. I know that is incredibly lame, but I couldn't help myself. He's the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I always want him to know that. When he got home from school, he threw his lunchbox on the counter, ran up to me and kissed me on the cheek. I love you too, Mommy, he said. Then he went into his room to do his homework. My heart filled with joy. I was floating as I started to clean out his lunchbox. Then, for the first time in a long time, I actually cried. I cried because, at that moment, I loved my life. I wished things would stay like that forever. I took the ice pack out of the lunchbox, then turned it upside down over the trash can. A few plastic baggies dropped into the trash, and then a piece of paper fluttered out. Paper made out of a different material than the one I'd written the note on. This one was glossy, small, and square. It was a Polaroid. Violent images flooded my mind, the flash under the door, the camera click, demonic laughter. I leaned against the wall. I was having trouble breathing. Calm down, I told myself. Calm down, breathe. That's it. Maybe it was just something Max was working on in class. I fished the picture out of the trash. It was taken inside a classroom, kids at their desks, talking amongst themselves. It was all normal enough. But then I noticed the angle at which the photo was taken. It was taken from the back of the classroom, shooting down at the kids' heads, almost like it was taken from the ceiling. Centered in the picture, held in sharp focus, was Max's smiling face. He was captured, mid-laugh. I screamed and dropped the picture. It spiraled to the ground and landed face down. There was a note scribbled on the back. Now, I don't know what to do. I thought it was the house. I thought that if we moved, we would leave that thing behind. But now I know it was all in vain, because it followed us. On the back, written in dark red ink, were the words, I love you too, Jenny. One thing to know about me, I love Halloween. Always have, always will. Every October I spend thousands making sure my house is the spookiest on the block. The decorations put even some of the local haunted houses to shame. Though I make sure not to go too crazy. Don't want another HOA citation. I also give out the best treats. King-size candy bars. That's right, king-size. It's no wonder so many trick-or-treaters come crowding outside my door each year. But of course, they'll have to earn it first. So many kids nowadays don't take Halloween seriously, throwing on last-minute costumes just to feed their sugar fix and rot their teeth out. You only get so many Halloweens before people start saying you're too old, and these brats are wasting them. Don't they know that some people would kill to be that age again? Young? Young like the girl currently ringing my doorbell? Trick or treat, she lisps between two missing front teeth while lifting up her treat bag. She can't be older than 6, and her costume isn't really much of one at all. Just an ordinary child's romper that cuts off above her terribly scraped up knees. Like she'd fallen on the way here. I feign a smile of my own. Now aren't you a cutie? Were you so excited to go trick-or-treating that you forgot to put on your costume, dear? The child freezes. You don't recognize me? I look her over again. Maybe she's dressed as a character from some TV show she likes. Still doesn't change the fact that it's an awful costume. Boring, like those wise kids who think it's a good idea to dress up as someone from The Office. A good costume should be eye-catching regardless of whether someone gets the reference or not. I'm sorry, hun. I really don't. Before I can shoo her off my porch, I notice tears welling up in her big green eyes. For heaven's sake, really? Reluctantly, I reach out to comfort her, and she grabs my arm with a strength uncanny for someone her size. An ugly, guttural sound emanates from her throat as she chokes back sobs. But you, she sniffles. I'm past. I can't make out the rest. Past what? Past the age to be making a scene on someone's porch? Speaking of, where is this girl's parents? I search for them in the evening gloom, and am instead greeted with a sight most unwelcome. Trick or treat! Choruses a new batch of kids. Great. More of them. Normally, more trick-or-treaters would be a good thing, but the 10 or so kids now marching up to me wear some of the cheapest, most half-assed costumes I've seen all night. Bedsheet ghosts, pirates donning nothing but a paper hat and an eye patch, a Dracula with only a blanket cape and candy fangs. Smell my feet! But all of that pales compared to the one leading the pack. A girl barely in her teens wearing nothing more than leggings and a stained shirt. In one hand holds a pillowcase to stow her treats, and in the other, a coffee mug for some godforsaken reason. Upon climbing the last step, she flashes me the most insufferable grin, finishing the song with, "Give me something good to eat." That doesn't. Everything starts to go red and my blood boils. Anyone who can't be bothered to dress up properly for Halloween deserves nothing. Maddeningly enough, the adolescent has the audacity to look confused at what I said. "She doesn't recognize us," cries the first little girl, still latched onto my arm. In my anger, I'd forgotten her. And wait, did she say us? Were they together? I inspect the little girl and the older one, noting that they share the same sage green eyes. One's not too different from my own, actually. Maybe they're sisters. Whatever the case, the teen somehow draws meaning from the outburst, and her arrogant smirk slips back into place. "Oh, but I am wearing a costume." "Oh, really now?" I snort. "Yep, you see, I'm you, but from let me guess, the future." The girl's eyes widen. "The present. I'm you, in the present," she finishes lamely. She's even trembling a bit. Ha! She must not have expected me to see through her ruse so easily, paper thin as it is, and had to pivot to an even more pathetic excuse. Like, really now? Me from the present? We aren't even wearing the same thing. What with me costumed as the Red Queen from Alice, and her as soccer mom? Going off the fact that her treat bag isn't empty, that little trick might have worked on the other bimbos that lived around here. But me? I have standards. The teen quickly recovers. "Come on, lady, don't be a Scrooge. What will you do with all that candy if not give it to us?" "Maybe I'll have it all to myself," I retort. Her green eyes lock onto my own. "You won't live very long with a diet like that." My rebuttal dies on my lips as I finally become aware of the other trick-or-treaters, the juvenile mob still silent behind her, and how their eyes, wide as saucers, seem mesmerized by the candy dish in my hand. Drool trickles from their mouths, running down cheap plastic masks and over-painted faces. Greedy little fingers jerk and spasm, forming claws ready to shred anything that stands in the way of their sweets. My blood turns cold and I feel the urge to rush back inside and away from these little monsters, slam the door in their faces. And I try, but the little girl has my arm in a death grip. I can't even budge an inch. Desperately, I search for anything, something, that can get me out of this situation, and spot a lone figure shambling towards us. "Now that's what I call a costume," I shout, pointing behind them. A couple of the delinquents manage to tear their eyes away from the candy dish long enough to follow my finger, and what follows after they lay eyes on the newcomer screams. At first it's just one, high and blood-curdling, sharp enough to split the nightly air in half, and then like dominoes the others turn around, first to the screamer, then to the cause of the screaming, and fall into the chorus until all the block seems to be filled with their terror. Not that it's completely unjustified, it's one hell of a costume. The newcomer is a girl of indiscriminate age, being impossible to tell from underneath her costume, through what must be an ingenious use of makeup and prosthetics. The new girl appears as if she's been eaten alive, or more accurately, gnawed to death by a horde of vermin. A soiled, raggedy dress reveals even raggedier flesh shot through with countless wounds oozing and congealed blood, and clustered around each one are ants, cockroaches, centipedes, posed to look like they're burrowing inside the girl, tunneling, hollowing her from the inside out. A living, walking hive. It must have cost a fortune. As the new girl shambles up the porch, the other kids back away from her, some of them fleeing outright. The only exception, surprisingly enough, is the first little girl who seems entirely unfazed by the gruesome costume. Still, it serves enough of a distraction for me to slip free from her grasp. Rubbing away the soreness in my arm, I turn to the newcomer with the first genuine smile of the night. "Hey there, sweetie. I love your costume." No words pass through the girl's scarred lips. Her only response is a silent stare, dull and one-eyed, as the other eye is a ruined bloody mess with bugs burrowing through the socket. Talk about staying in character. I scoop a handful of candy into her palm, a palm attached to a hand that looks like a Rottweiler's chew toy. The flesh on her pinky has been entirely gnawed off, exposing bone, and from it dangles a small black rat, hanging on by its teeth buried into the bone. Another rubber prop, I assume. That is, until I see the thing twitch. I shriek, jumping back, causing the candy dish to slip out of my hands and into the bushes below. The girl doesn't react in any matter, still as the grave, and so is the rat, just as lifeless. Neither now does the rat biting into her hand, if it had ever actually moved in the first place. I must be more shaken up from that close call earlier than I'd thought. My cheeks burn bright in embarrassment. I'll go get some more candy, hun. Be right back. I dive back inside, heading for the cellar where I keep the leftover Halloween candy. It's dark inside the cellar. The stale air is, paradoxically, both dusty and humid. I rarely come down here. I'll have to hire a cleaner. The lone, naked light bulb sputters through light to barely make out the far wall. I walk over to a box labeled Halloween Leftovers in fat black Sharpie. As I reach to grab it off the shelf, I notice the date scrawled under it. It's not from last year, but from 4 Halloweens ago. And yet, somehow, the box feels oddly heavy, oddly full. Slowly I open the top flaps, and am immediately sent gagging from the stench of spoiled milk and fermented sugar. No, this won't do. This won't do at all. I'm hiring that cleaner first thing in the morning. When the nauseous fumes have finally left my lungs, the tears they sprung blinked away. I realize in dawning horror that this is not a one-time blunder. Deeper into the cellar, lining the walls, are entire shelves of old Halloween leftovers. Like the first, each box is marked with a date, revealing an entire mausoleum of spoiled sweets. A sugary graveyard. How could there be so much of it? Did I really hand out so few treats each Halloween? Perhaps I should lower my standards. Just a bit. Walking down the aisle, I notice underneath the sound of creaking floorboards a grating warble. I can't pinpoint the source. It's effusive, seemingly emanating from all around me. It grows louder as I walk farther in, to the point where it sets on my teeth on edge. I'll have to remember to hire an electrician as well. Obviously, the wiring is faulty. At the end of the hall, I finally reach a box marked as last year's goodies. Unlike the other one, this one is taped up, requiring me to scratch off the corners of the tape on the sides to open it. The candy still looks edible, though the wrappers are a little sticky. This should suffice. I'm lifting it up when the largest cockroach I've ever seen darts from behind the shelf. I yelp, stumbling back into an adjacent shelf hard enough that the box it holds tips over, drenching me in a saccharine emulsion of spoiled chocolate and melted taffy. Yuck. My beautiful costume. Ruined. And I don't even want to think about getting this out of my hair. Even removing my now soiled dress doesn't help much. The sugary goop seeped right through it, and onto my skin where it adheres like a candy crust. Double yuck. While I'm picking myself off the floor, I notice something in the corner of my vision. Propped up on a lower shelf is a book, a photo album of my childhood. Conspicuously, already opened to a page in the middle. I recognize the photo instantly. It was taken 20-some years ago. Depicting a me fresh out of kindergarten. I remember the day well, of course. I had fallen off the swing set, landing face first, knocked out my 2 front teeth, and got scraped up real bad. A small part of me thinks it a little messed up that my parents would put this in the album. A much larger part of me is consumed with the realization that the bawling girl in the photo is the splitting image of the little girl I'd met earlier, the one missing her front teeth. Unbidden, her words pop into my head. When I asked about her costume. I'm past. Past. P-A-S-T. That's what she meant. She's me from the past. Baffling choice and get-up aside, there's absolutely no way she could have seen this photo, having been down here collecting dust all these years. Even I had long forgotten about it. And like some great horrendous machine churning to life, my brain begins to turn. Begins to make other connections as well. Like about the older girl who claimed to be me from the present, and how, with my costume taken off, I noticed that my underclothes are the exact same. Even the coffee stain from when I spilled my latte during my rush to find batteries for the animatronic skeleton. Okay, so there's one girl dressed up as me from the past, another as me in the present. Did that mean that there was one more girl, the me from the future? For some reason, the thought brings chills. I mentally replay the night's events in my head and can't come up with anyone that could fit the bill. Maybe they don't exist. Maybe there is no third weird little girl with an eerily accurate costume. Or maybe I just haven't met them yet. Haven't gone inside before they could arrive. If I was to go back outside as originally planned, would I get to meet her? Maybe she's already out on the porch, right now. Would I even want to? To meet this me from the future? The thought is morbidly tantalizing, like standing on the edge of a cliff. Inexorable as gravity. I shake the thoughts out of my head. This is stupid. With this Halloween being a bust, the only thing I'm going to do is turn my lights off early and get this candy off me by way of a long hot shower. Picking myself up, I dust myself off. Or try to anyway. The gummy sweets adhere too strongly to my skin and clothes to brush off. Definitely going to need that shower. I make my way to exit, but when I try the door, it refuses to budge. Because of course it wouldn't. Guess I'll have to hire a locksmith too. I never should have come down here. I shoot a text to my maid who has a spare key of my house. 2 minutes later and still no response. Just because you're on your day off doesn't mean you can't pick up your calls, Martha. Good grief. For a second, I debate calling 911 but ultimately decide against it. It's not really an emergency. Besides, I don't want to give any of those terminally bored housewives I'm unfortunate to call neighbors anything more to gawk at. Decision made, I plop down on the floor, determined to wait until the maid sees my text, or at the very worst, when she undoubtedly finds me at 6 a.m. tomorrow when she reports in for work. But as the minutes well away in this dusty cellar, the night's events and revelations begin to gnaw at me. I realize that I'm breathing way too fast. Try to do some breath exercises. Doesn't work. I heard once that journaling can be calming, hence this little story I wrote on my phone, recounting the strange series of events from start to finish. It helps a little, I think. I'm still debating whether I should actually post it or not. On one hand, I'm not much for strangers prying into my business. On the other hand, commiserating with strangers on the crappiness today's generation of kids could very much be what I need to get through this even crappier situation. In the midst of my typing, the buzzing sounds reach a peak, taking on a new form that sounds almost like chittering, a cacophonous noise coming from all around me. I lift my eyes and am met with hundreds more, belonging to a horde of vermin. In every direction lies ants and roaches and rats, all grotesquely fat from years of gorging on spoiled sweets, and I can tell from the way they look at my sugar-saturated form, their appetite isn't quite sated yet. Their ravenous gaze brings to mind the kids still waiting on my porch. All of them had that same hungry look. Well, all except one. The last girl in the impressively made costume. I had seen something almost sadden her one remaining eye. An eye of sage green, just like my own. I'm already onto my feet, pounding on the door before I realize the scream tearing out of my throat, noticed only through the burning of vocal cords shredding themselves against each other. The sound itself doesn't reach my own ears, drowned out as if by the scuttling of thousands of clawed feet and the chittering of gnashing teeth. I don't dare look back, vision narrowing solely to the door in front of me, and how it can't be locked because the knob turns and yet it won't move. I fumble around with my phone, madly shaking my legs to get bugs and worse from crawling up them, and turn on the flashlight, glued stuck with the door hinges and some gummy substance. Old taffy. Desperate, I try clawing it off, but recoil when I feel a sharp pain in my hand. I lift my hand up to the phone's light. Dangling off my pinky is a small, mottled black rat. It had bitten me right down to the bone. I'll be entirely honest with you. I don't really know what to do right now. I just decided to write this on here. My hands are literally still shaking as I type this. I have no idea what happened to me today. For context, my name's Jack and I work at a bottle shop. It's actually not terrible work, for the most part. It's owned and operated independently as a small business, so I get pretty taken care of on payday. It's one of those bottle stores that operates as a drive-through. Either a customer comes up to the counter with their alcohol and I scan it through for them, or they pull up in the drive-thru and I serve them with whatever they need. Anyways, there's this event in town at the moment. It's an annual thing, and the store has pretty much blown up. I can't really keep up with everything happening, so my boss said he was planning on hiring a new guy for me to work with on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. Hence today's horrifying events. Earlier today at 4 p.m., I clocked in for a 3-hour shift. It was really business as usual, but being a Friday, I was definitely preparing to get slammed. As I clocked in on the computer in the back office, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I grabbed it and saw Sam Boss was phoning me. I clicked accept and put the phone to my ear. "Good afternoon," I offered warmly. "Hey mate, it's Sam. You clocking in now?" "Yep, just got to work." "Easy. Listen, you're gonna love me for this. We're trialing a new employee tonight. He should be getting there any second. Name's Damien. You all good to show him the ropes?" "Thank God, Sam. I was literally just mentally preparing myself to get overrun with customers. Yeah, I'll show him how everything's done." "No problems. Look, I'm on my way to that meeting I was telling you about, and I'm just about to hit a black spot, so I'll let you go. Give me a buzz after you clock out, and let me know how he went. Keep in mind I'm in and out of meetings until just after 7, alright? No worries, Sam. Thanks again. See you. And that was that. I wish I could go back, turn around, and never have stepped foot into the store that night. But I did. I walked out of the office and into the main part of the store and saw a short, slightly chubby man standing behind the counter looking at me. There he is! Damien! I exclaimed, as I went up and shook his hand. That's right. What's your name? He responded excitedly. I'm Jack. It's nice to meet you, mate. Let me show you around. The first thing I noticed about Damien was his smile. All the teeth in his mouth seemed visible, and his smile literally never seemed to waver. I don't actually remember ever seeing him with a straight face. As I showed him around, I tried to get to know him a little bit. Whereabouts are you from, Damien? I asked. Not from around here, was all he responded with. Yeah, cool. How'd you find out about this job? I just saw the opportunity, he said, his smile quivering. I just nodded at that. I didn't really seem to get straight answers in the questions I was asking. Instead, he would respond exclusively in a manner which operated to provide as little information as possible. I finished showing him where everything was, and we returned to the counter. To be honest, the shift started pretty slow, but Damien and I actually struck a bit of a good system. We would trade customers so as to stagger the workload between the two of us, and whenever one of us wasn't with a customer, the other would be stocking the shelves. Not long after the system was engaged, I realized how clueless he was with interacting with these customers. I honestly just assumed that maybe he didn't have a customer service background or something. But this guy was at least in his 40s. I wasn't sure how anyone could get to that age and be as poor in customer relations as this gentleman. For example, this one guy came in, and Damien didn't even initiate the interaction. He stood there smiling at him, waiting for the customer to tell him what he wanted without any provocation. That struck me as really odd. About half an hour went by, and then service really started to pick up. People were coming home from work around that time, so I underwent what I usually did on weekends. A battering. We continued to trade customers, and although his social skills weren't great, the system was working. I found that I was having to work a lot less hard than I usually did. Then something strange happened. I waved goodbye to a usual customer, and this older lady Damien had just served pulled over to the side of the drive-thru. I saw her arm stick out her window, followed by her head. She looked right at me and waved me over. A little bit thrown, I walked over to her, preparing to get yelled at for one reason or another. "Hi, mate," she said in a gravelly voice. "Look, not to be an asshole or anything, but you might want to review the performance of your colleague over there." She pointed vaguely in the direction he was standing. He was facing away from us doing absolutely nothing, but even from the back of his head, and the way his cheeks looked, I could tell he was smiling. He didn't say a bloody word to me. He just stared at me for ages, then silently went and got my things after I blurted out what I wanted. He also didn't stop smiling once. Yeah, this is his first shift. I think he's just nervous." But I didn't get to finish what I was saying, as we were both looking in his direction, and as I was speaking, a tooth fell out of his mouth. A single tooth. It fell in front of him, and bounced off the box that was at his feet, landing just beside him. Me and the woman were stunned. We just watched for a few more seconds. "Love, I don't know what's happening here, but be careful. I've got to run, but seriously, be careful." She peeled out of the drive-thru, leaving me shocked and alone. I probably watched him for at least 2 or 3 more minutes, which doesn't sound like a long time, but trust me when I say it is. In a silent drive-thru, watching a smiling man stare aimlessly into the back of a fridge, it was just bizarre. I finally pulled up the courage to continue about my work. After that customer, we hit a huge quiet patch. I went to the fridges on the opposite side of the store and began to load them. After a little bit, I heard him moving over to the other side of the shop. I looked over and saw he'd shuffled over to behind the counter now. Now he's facing right in my direction. I continued to load the fridge, and Damien did not stop staring at me for even 1 second. He didn't break eye contact. I could see in my peripheral vision that his outline remained facing towards me, smiling and observing. For 1 split second, I mustered up the guts to glance in his direction, and saw a missing front tooth. My stomach genuinely sank. It was the worst feeling. Just as I returned to my work, I heard the gentle rumble of an engine as a car pulled up in the drive-thru window. I heard absolutely no movement from behind me in Damien's direction, meaning it was clearly up to me to greet and serve the customer. Shakily, I walked to the driver's side window and said my usual greetings. As the customer was telling me what he wanted, I heard a clink and tapping sound coming from behind me. I immediately knew what it was, but I still had to turn around to check. Unsurprisingly, he continued to smile, but now there were 2 gaps in his mouth. He'd lost another tooth. "Oi," the guy in the car shouted. "Mate, I was talking to you." "Sorry, mate," I responded, still looking at Damien. He just stared at me and smiled. He didn't blink. He didn't even seem to be breathing. The customer repeated what he wanted, and then it dawned on me that, in order for me to scan it though, I was going to have to go up to the counter and stand right next to that creep. A pang of nerves hit my gut, but I had to do what I had to do. I grabbed his drinks from the fridge and made my way back around the corner. Of course, the scan tool decided to crap itself right as I was using it, so I had to stuff around for even longer than I planned on doing. He was right next to me, but I didn't look at him once. I was too scared. I walked around and gave the customer his stuff, and he sped away without so much as a thank you. Finally, the clock on the wall ticked over to 6:55 p.m., and it was time to close. As I turned around to grab the keys from the counter, I yelled. He had been standing right behind me. "Damien!" I yelled. I was scared. I actually didn't know why I yelled. He didn't change. He continued to smile. I just need to lock up and get out of here, I thought to myself. I walked around him with a newfound sense of bravery, grabbed the keys and went over to the roller doors. I went around locking everything, not even caring to check on the whereabouts of my colleague. As I crouched down to lock the last roller door into place, I noticed I had goosebumps. I wasn't even sure why. Then my blood ran cold as I looked in the reflection of the fridge in front of me. That guy was right behind me. My fight or flight reaction kicked in. I turned around, punched him in his liver, and sprinted as fast as I physically could to the nearest lockable door, the bathroom. As I rounded the corner to the back, I heard heavy footsteps behind me, way too heavy to proportionately match Damien's stature, way too fast to be human. I threw the men's bathroom door open and slammed it behind me, locking it on instinct. No sooner had I locked the door than a deafening bang sounded upon it. He was right outside. Words cannot describe the fear I was in. I'm not usually easily scared or anything, and I don't think that my recounting of these events does justice to the horror that would be felt under the circumstances. There was silence for a second, and then an extensive series of bangs rang out on the door. It was like there were 10 men out there, all banging on the door at once. It was such a strong sound. Slowly it picked up in pace. Soon the banging was occurring at a seemingly impossible speed. There is not a single chance that whatever was out there was human. No human in the world would ever hit the door as hard and fast as he was. Then finally, it stopped. Silence. I saw the door handle tremble slowly. I remember thinking to myself, is he just trying to open the door? The trembling stopped, and so too did the commotion of the evening. I probably called Sam like 7 or 8 times, but he didn't pick up at all. I stayed there in that bathroom for hours. I was way too scared to do anything. In retrospect, I have no idea why I didn't just call the cops. My adrenaline was so spiked that the only option in my mind was to call Sam for some reason. Finally, after an eternity, my phone buzzed. It was Sam. I answered straight away. Before I could say anything, his voice rang loudly into my ear. Jack, I know you're probably frustrated, but that's no way to respond to a situation outside of my control. I've been in and out of meetings all evening. You knew that. Jesus, were you so busy you couldn't handle the drive-through on your own? Sam, you have no idea what happened. He was crazy. I think I need to call the cops. Just as I was about to launch into informing him of the night's events, his words turned over in my mind. Wait, Sam, what are you talking about? What do you mean I couldn't handle the drive-through on my own? Jack, I've already apologized the trainee didn't show up. He said he was sick and wouldn't be able to come in. Still no reason to give me an earful for it. My stomach dropped. The new guy never showed up. What? No, he didn't show up. He was sick. He said he'd come in next weekend to trial with you. Sorry you've got to do another weekend on your own, mate. His words sat like a ton of bricks in the air. I hung up on him. I swung open the door and looked at the door handle. It had bite marks on it, of a very specific formation. The bite indentations on the wood had one upper tooth missing and one lower tooth missing. I checked everywhere in the store. There was no sign of a struggle. Whatever it was just vanished. I don't know where it went. Every time I think about what went down tonight, the realization just sets in on me again. The real trainee never showed up. I have no idea who or what I worked with tonight. My whole town's gone into a state of mass hypnosis. It started with the tomato seeds. She got a whole bunch of vegetable seeds, but she talked about the tomato ones the most. Apparently they were the juiciest and most reddish tomatoes she had ever seen. The guy said he got them from a Native American tribe down south, jokingly warning her how good they are. My wife planted all the vegetables the day after. Surprisingly, some of them soon grew small roots from the ground, but one rose to dominate above them all. The tomato plant had sprouted, and small tomatoes were growing on it. My wife was excited about her gardening achievement. That very night, she picked off the still small tomatoes and put them on toast with some cheese and ham. She kept saying how unbelievably delicious they were. Her eyes were rolling back into her head midway through her toast. After the first one, she walked back to the tomato plant and picked up the remaining ones, even the ones that definitely didn't look ripe. She knows how bad my acid reflux gets whenever I eat one, but she kept persuading me to at least have a bite. I managed to resist. The morning after, I woke up early for work. While eating my quick bowl of overnight oats, I looked out onto the garden. Much to my surprise, the tomato plant had tomatoes growing on it again. This time they were bigger than yesterday, and there were so many of them. It looked like the plant would crumble under the weight. I walked out to the garden to look closer at them. I picked one of the plants, but the tomato was strangely greasy with gooey green slime. When I tried to smell them, a foul odor of iron and mold hit my nose. When I came back from work, I looked out again, and they were all gone. I heard some rumbling in the shed outside. I thought a raccoon had found some trash and was having a feast in our garden shed. I walked over, and there was my wife looking for her gardening tools with seeds in her hand. "What are you doing, honey?" "Oh, I love how the tomatoes taste. See how fast they grow? I want to plant a couple more of them. Are you sure there's gonna be space for them? We can barely fit the plants we got there now. It's okay if there isn't. I'll take out the other vegetables and plant them. Oh, but why? I was excited about them. And you know I can't eat tomatoes. I know you can't, but they're just so good. I know it upsets your stomach, but you should try them. I think a night of stomach acid is not worth it. She nodded back, but it looked like what I said went over her head. She started digging through the tools again. I had a good engineering job at a nearby agricultural company, so my wife was able to stay home and take care of the household. She would usually wake up late, around 8 a.m., much later than my usual 6:30 alarm. I got dressed up for work and went down into the kitchen. To my surprise, she was already picking the tomatoes in the garden. All the tomato plants sprouted overnight and were overgrown with tomatoes. They are magical, my wife yelled out from the garden. I just nodded my head and started pouring up some coffee. When I looked back, she was talking to the neighbor and giving him some of the tomatoes from her basket. The basket was already overflowing, but the tomato plants weren't even halfway picked. I yelled out to her that I'd be on my way to work, and she looked up, waved at me, and got back to her picking. Her behavior seemed strange. She would usually at least give me a hug or even plead with me not to leave the house and stay around for a while. Plus, how did all the plants spring up again? The first one grew really fast, but it still seemed believable. How could a plant grow in only 10 hours and have fruit on it? Most of my concerns went away as I got to work and had to focus on other important things. That day, I had to stay at work longer. Some issues with our conveyor belt came up. I tried calling my wife to let her know I'd be coming in late that evening, but she didn't answer. I arrived home at around 8 p.m. hungry as ever, excited about my wife's cooking. When I stayed late at work, she would always prepare a meal I enjoyed to cheer me up. Walking into the kitchen, I saw my wife sitting at our dinner table, eating tomatoes out of a huge basket. The kitchen looked clean and polished with no food in sight. "Hi, honey. How are you doing?" I said, and I sat at the table. "Good," she replied, barely looking at me, and continuing to munch on her tomatoes. "I tried calling you, saying that I'd be coming late from work, but you didn't answer." "Oh, must have missed it," she replied coldly. "Did you cook anything?" "No, I didn't have time." "What on earth could you be so busy about? You don't work," I said quietly to myself, not wanting to start an argument. "Have some tomatoes if you're hungry, honey," she said, this time looking at me with a joyful face. "You know I can't have any. My reflux would be crazy. But these are so good. I'm sure the tomatoes wouldn't hurt you. They wouldn't do such a thing to you." She now had a big grin on her face, with her pupils dilated and eyes opened unnaturally wide. Never mind. When the first basket was finished, she walked out to the backyard to get some more. To my surprise, the garden already looked way different from the time I left this morning. Not only were all the vegetables gone, but the flowers my wife planted when we first moved in were all plucked out. When she came back, I tried talking to her again, asking why she would replace the flowers she loved, but she kept repeating how the tomatoes are so good, and that I need to try them to understand. All the stress from work had finally piled up, and made my eyes feel like two heavy bags. I decided there was no talking to her anymore, and retreated upstairs. Looking from my bedroom window, I could see my neighbors, who my wife had given tomatoes that morning, digging around in their garden. Like magic, the morning after, all the plants my wife planted yesterday were overgrown with tomatoes again. The backyard now looked like a red ball pit. She was already bringing the first basket in when I was making my morning coffee. She sat at the table and started eating them. A nutritious and well-balanced breakfast, I said, trying to make a joke, but she flashed an angry look. I took my cup of coffee and walked out into the garden to see what was going on there. "Hey Adam, how are you doing?" I asked my next-door neighbor, who I could see standing next to a fence, eating one of the juicy red tomatoes. "Oh, I'm doing great, Steve. The tomatoes your wife gave us are unbelievable. We planted them yesterday and they have grown overnight. Have you tried them yet? Your wife told me you haven't because of some stomach problems." "Yeah, I could see you guys digging in the garden yesterday. No, I haven't tried them. I got a bad case of acid reflux, and tomatoes can ruin my day." "Oh, I knew we had to plant them when I tried the first one. You need to try them." He now had the same manic look my wife flashed me yesterday. That day's work was slow, which gave me time to think about what was happening at home. I don't want to creep myself out too much, but my wife's behavior was odd to say the least. On my drive home from work, I saw people from my town digging in their gardens. It was the season when people would usually start planting, but why did everyone decide to start today? Arriving home, I saw my wife and next-door neighbors sitting at our dinner table. We did have good relations with them, but this was the first time they ever came over. Everyone was sitting around the table eating the tomatoes and talking about how delicious they were. No one said hi when I entered, not even my wife. Almost like the tomatoes put them in a state of hypnosis. I said hi to them, but barely anyone seemed to care. Only once I sat down, my neighbor looked at me. "Come on, neighbor. Still haven't changed your mind about the tomatoes? Take some. There are a few from my garden there, too." "I really can't," I replied. "They wouldn't hurt you, son. Just have a bite." He tried to push the tomato uncomfortably close to my face. I almost had to slap his hand away. The tomato smelled foul. I could see the green, gooey slime on the tomato's skin. My neighbor's fingers were covered with it, too. After seeing that there was no chance of getting me to eat one, he resorted to munching on it himself and talking to the others at the table. I looked out into the garden, and at first I couldn't believe my eyes. The dirt all over our garden was tilled. I looked over the fence, and my neighbor's garden looked the same. I tried to walk out onto it to take a closer look, but my wife ran from the table and started dragging me by the arm. "Stop it. You're going to hurt them," she yelled out. "Jesus Christ, all right. Calm down," I yelled out too. She wouldn't let go of the grip until I walked into the house again. She threw a nasty frown and walked back to the table to her basket of tomatoes. Both of my neighbors were looking at me now, too, with a scolding face like parents who learned about your last misdeed. The morning after, I woke up to a loud banging and rattling, like I was next to a construction site. I looked out my window and saw my wife with some of our neighbors taking down the shed in our backyard. I hurried out with my pajamas still on, almost tripping on the stairs. I didn't even put on any shoes. Ran out into the garden and started screaming at everyone to tell me what the hell was going on. "We're making room for tomatoes. There's nowhere else to plant them." She smiled and looked back at me with a very peaceful expression, like what she said made complete sense. "What do you mean, make room for the tomatoes? The garden is filled with them. Where are you going to put all my tools?" I screamed at her. "They're in the basement." She wasn't smiling anymore. I ran in front of them, waving my hands above my head, saying they needed to stop and get going. Their looks turned from concern to anger. One of the neighbors, Jack, dropped his claw hammer, walked up to me, pushed me, and told me to get lost. I couldn't believe it at first. I stood there for a second with a bewildered look on my face. Then they all dropped their tools and, in almost magical unison, started pushing me and telling me to get away, and that I don't understand. My wife joined them too. At that point, I retreated into the house. I was panting, my whole body was shaking, and sweat started forming on my lower back. I called in sick to work and sat at the dinner table for a while. I had no idea how much time had passed by, and my mind filtered out all the outside noise. When my emotions finally calmed down and I came to, they were still working on the shed outside. I ran back into the bedroom, dressed, and walked out to ask someone for help. But to my dismay, everywhere I looked, people were in their gardens digging up dirt with a basket of tomatoes next to them. This happened 4 days ago. I have not been to work since. Over the weekend, I tried to get to the farmer's market, but the guy was not there anymore. No matter how hard I looked, he was nowhere to be found. People in my town have completely dug up their gardens to plant the tomato plants. The ones who don't have space anymore have resorted to the same plan my wife had, slowly taking down sheds, patios, fences, fire pits, and all other things taking up space in their yards. I thought about calling the police, but what was I going to say to them? That some group of avid tomato lovers is tearing up their backyards? Reporting the assault is not an option either. I have no witnesses. They'd probably turn it against me. When they don't work, they all gather at our house, eat tomatoes and whisper. Nothing else. Just whispering and eating the tomatoes. I sometimes listen to them whisper the same phrase over and over. They're so delicious. Whenever I walk down, they all look at me in unison. Their gaze follows my every move like a shadow. Edit. I can hear them outside the door now. The room is full of the smell of rotten iron. They're chanting. It's time to try the tomatoes. Sometimes I think we may have been too eager to own a home. If we had taken our time and been more discerning, we probably would not have ended up as involuntary hosts to the dozens of yearly visitors that wander onto our property from the small business next door. We live next to a funeral home, and by next to, I mean if our two buildings were any closer together, they could be condensed into a townhouse. A small strip of yellowish-green grass, barely wide enough to fit two people side by side, is all that separates our properties. And evidently, that strip belongs to my wife and me, because if we don't mow it, it doesn't get cut. Really, I should say that we live behind a funeral home, because while it is our closest neighboring property on our left side, that side of our house is actually facing its rear. The funeral home is on the corner of our block, and its entrance is situated more or less perpendicular to our front door on the wall farthest from our house. The strange juxtaposition of our two buildings' orientations is ugly and a little uncanny, but I suppose I can't complain, because it means that I rarely have to see the funeral home's clientele, or at the very least, their living clientele. The listing of our house didn't say anything about it being next to a funeral home, and when we pulled up to view it, we were more than a little put off by the prospect of living next to a building that at any given time would most likely contain at least one dead person. But the price was right, and after months of bad luck with the housing market, along with the expiration of our apartment lease quickly approaching, we jumped at the chance to finally have a place we could call our own. Besides, my wife and I both hold a fascination with all things paranormal and macabre. We spent our entire first date gushing over ghost shows and talking about the authenticity of various haunted objects. So after viewing the house and realizing that it had almost everything that we were looking for, we managed to convince ourselves that living next to such a strange, creepy building could actually be pretty cool. And to be fair, sometimes it actually is. Other times, however, it very much isn't. Our house, at 109 years old, is definitely up there in age, but its interior was fully renovated a couple of decades before we moved in. So despite its mildly gothic exterior of gray, faded stone, arched windows, and sharp, multi-pointed roof. The inside is actually mostly semi-modern. All of the surrounding houses, including the funeral home, are even older than and are of a similar build to ours, and we quite frankly love the aesthetic that it gives the entire block. Autumns feel especially cool, and the natural spookiness that our neighborhood exudes lends itself to making Halloween especially fun for the kids, as well as any horror enthusiasts like my wife and me who happen to live in the area. Most of the time we appreciate the overall vibe, but it certainly makes things even more eerie when our guests pay their unexpected visits. Mr. Grayson, the owner and director of the funeral home, is a slightly strange, albeit decent enough guy. He, similar to his home, is getting up there in years, evidenced by his stark gray hair and wrinkly pale skin. But judging by the naked ring finger on his left hand, he doesn't appear to be married, nor to even have anybody else living in the home with him. He mostly keeps to himself, but he came by about a week after we had moved in to introduce himself to us. After exchanging pleasantries and partaking in a brief conversation, he steered the conversation to the business of his business. He said he hoped that living next to a funeral home wouldn't bother us too much, and that the positioning of the two houses would allow us to keep our privacy even when he hosted services. He told us that he didn't provide cremations, that he preferred to do things the old school way, whatever that meant, so we wouldn't have to worry about any unpleasant smells. And while he had a small parking lot attached to his property, often cars would wind up spilling out along the streets, but service goers actually parked on the curb in front of his building and only rarely ventured into the space in front of our house. We thanked him for the heads up and said that it was nice to meet him. He turned to go, but he only made it to the middle step of our front porch before he turned back. "One more thing that I forgot to mention," he said. "You may notice that my clients tend to wander. At times they may briefly wander onto your property. You needn't worry, they won't harm you, and they will listen to you if you tell them to move on. I just thought I should forewarn you now before you find yourself positively spooked for no good reason." He turned to leave again before we could respond. "Well, have a pleasant rest of your day, and don't be a stranger, you hear? We'd love to have you over for dinner so we can welcome you to the neighborhood." He shuffled down our porch steps and made his way back to his home, disappearing inside and largely removing himself from our lives. Neither of us were particularly interested in his dinner invitation, and we doubted that he was either. Pleasantries and all that. At the time, we didn't think much of Mr. Grayson's final warning. We assumed that when he said clients, he was talking about disoriented mourners who sometimes wound up where they didn't belong. We doubted that it would be a big deal, and so promptly forgot about it after a brief discussion about the strangeness of the whole encounter. The first incident didn't come until close to a month later. By then we had largely forgotten about Mr. Grayson and his cryptic words of caution. We rarely even saw the funeral director outside of the occasional glimpses of him on his grandiose front porch welcoming mourners on service days, and the stress of the move had our minds very far away from our first interaction with the peculiar man. It happened on a night in late spring, one of those hot, sweltering days that feel more like early summer, despite what the calendar would have you believe. I woke up in the middle of the night desperately needing to pee, and seeing as our bedroom had never had a master bathroom installed during any of the house's renovations, I was forced to walk out of our room and all the way down the long hallway to the lone second-floor bathroom on the far end, hoping that my tired, lumbering footsteps didn't wake my light sleeper of a wife. I didn't turn the light on in the bathroom, so by the time I reached the toilet, did my business, and stepped back into the hallway, my eyes had properly adjusted to the darkness that enveloped me. Had I turned on the light, thus resetting my night vision, I might not have even noticed the little girl standing at the top of the staircase. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. The first thing I noticed about her was that she was wearing a pink polka dot bathing suit, which immediately struck me as odd for that time of night. The second was that she was positively soaking wet, her small frame weighed down by a heavy curtain of water that gave her clammy skin an unnatural shine, and which forced her chestnut hair to cling to her little skull like a thin sheet of plastic wrap. She stood staring at me from the shadows at the nighttime gloom. As still as death, while droplets of water fell from her swimsuit and weakly splashed against the hardwood floor at her feet. I immediately picked up on the overpowering scent of chlorine. Had this occurred only a few years later, I may have thought she was my own daughter looking back at me from the shadows, but seeing as we did not have any children at the time of this incident, the girl's presence completely baffled me. She stared at me with her pair of glassy, distant eyes for a few long seconds before I managed to chase away the surprise that kept me frozen in place. "Are you all right, little girl?" I asked her. No response. Are you lost?" Silence. "Where are your parents?" For several moments, I thought she wasn't going to speak, until finally she found her words. I don't know." Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, and while she was looking in my direction, I realized that she was not staring at me, but at a point behind me, as if I were not there at all. "What's your name?" I asked her, but before I could get a response, I heard the sound of my wife shuffling out onto the hallway. When she saw me, frozen stiff in the nighttime gloom, she frowned. "Who are you talking to?" she asked in her groggy, half-asleep voice. "And why does it smell like a pool out here?" "This little girl must be lost," I said. "She says she doesn't know." In the brief moment that I turned to look at my wife, the girl had disappeared. For a while I stood completely still in the hallway, dumbfounded, at a loss for words. I may have convinced myself that I had imagined the entire encounter in my head, sleep-deprived mind, were it not for the pungent puddle of chlorinated water that still rested at the top of the stairs. We immediately called 911, not because we were frightened of a little girl being somewhere in our house, but because we were concerned about her well-being. The police arrived fairly quickly, all things considered, and after asking a number of questions that I answered with varying degrees of confidence, they did a surprisingly curt search of our home that turned up no results. The girl was gone. Were it not for the puddle that she had left behind, I couldn't have said for sure if she had even existed at all. I was stunned when one of the officers told me that, well, they would file a police report. There was nothing more they could do. "Nothing more you can do?" I said. "But there's a lost little girl around here somewhere. You aren't even going to ask around the neighborhood about her or something?" The officer, looking like he had a lot to say, seemed to weigh his words before he finally sighed and spoke. "Look, you just moved into this place recently, right? Which means you probably don't know this yet, but this isn't the first call of this type that we've had at this residence. Not by a long shot." "What, you mean like that girl has been here before?" "Not exactly," the officer said. "People tend to see strange things in this house, things that aren't necessarily there." "But she left a puddle at the top of my stairs," I said, flabbergasted. "It's still sitting up there right now. You're telling me I imagined that?" "No," he said. "In fact, I'm sure you saw something, but I don't know that it's exactly what you might be thinking." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully again. "Look, you're the lieutenant's nephew, right? I think it's probably more his place to explain this to you. Give him a call tomorrow morning, and he'll give you the skinny on this house. But in the meantime, rest easy tonight knowing that there is no lost little girl in a polka dot bathing suit wandering around this neighborhood. Of that, I can assure you." His words were not at all reassuring. The police left, and after cleaning up the puddle of water that was soaking into the hardwood of the upstairs landing, my wife and I went back to bed. My mind was too preoccupied by the thought of the lost little girl to fall back to sleep, so when morning came, I groggily crawled out of bed and followed that officer's advice. My uncle is, at the time of writing this, a nearly 3-decade veteran of my town's police department. He's seen it all throughout the course of his career, including, apparently, personally going on several calls to my house back in the day, and so when I called him asking about the previous night's incident, he immediately knew what I was talking about. "Geez," he said from the other end of the line. "I didn't realize that you had moved into that house. If I had, I probably would have told you to steer clear of it before you signed anything that was legally binding." I frowned at this, despite knowing that he couldn't see it. "Why? What exactly is wrong with our new house?" My uncle waited a long time before answering, so long that I actually thought he had hung up on me, or we had otherwise lost connection before he finally spoke again. "There is some weird stuff that happens at that house, kid." "I've already gathered as much," I said, trying my best to check my annoyance while speaking to my uncle. What I don't understand yet is what exactly that means. Again, there was an uncomfortably long pause. "Let me start by telling you this. The reason that officer last night knew that the little girl in the polka dot bathing suit wasn't wandering around your neighborhood is because he knew that she had died earlier this week." I can still remember the chill that ran up my spine when my uncle told me this. The invisible line that connected our two phones suddenly felt very heavy, and only grew more dense with each passing moment of silence that followed. I knew that I needed to speak if I wanted to alleviate some of that weight. An exasperated, "What?" was all I could muster. "Yeah," he said, sounding sorry to have been the one to tell me this. "She drowned during her swim lessons over the weekend. All of the adults in the pool were distracted with other students, and, well, did you know that a person can drown in less than 30 seconds? I hardly even heard my uncle's drowning fact. For a few seconds, I didn't even know what to say. But how is that possible when I just saw her here last night? Without looking into it, I'm willing to bet she wound up at the funeral home next to your house." "What makes you say that?" "Because the clients of that funeral home, they don't like to stay in the funeral home. I can't tell you how many calls we've gotten over the years of new homeowners, seeing mysterious figures and uninvited guests in that house of yours, and each time we've looked into it, we've learned that the guests in question match the description of recent arrivals at Grayson Funeral Home." "What, you mean like they're ghosts?" I said. "You're not telling me the entire police department believes that, are you?" "It's not hard to believe with how many times it's happened," he said. "The facts don't lie, and all I'm doing is telling you the facts." I took a moment to absorb this. "Okay, so assuming I believe you, what are we supposed to do now? Just live our lives in this house, never knowing the next time we're going to see another one of these visitors?" "There's a reason so many people have moved in and out of that place over the years," my uncle said. "Living with ghosts certainly isn't for everybody, but you shouldn't be in any sort of danger. As far as I know, the visitors don't seem to mean any harm. They're merely lost, confused, not yet able to accept that they've died. A little push in the right direction usually sees them on their way." "Usually?" "Some of them might be a little more stubborn than others. We've definitely gotten calls about the same figures appearing over and over again in that house. But again, they don't mean any harm. They just might inadvertently give you a fright every now and again. Right, like how that girl last night would have made me piss my pants had I not already taken care of my bladder a few moments beforehand. I wanted to say. Instead, I thanked him for being a big help. "No problem, buddy," he said. "And if you ever have any questions about the people you see, just give me a call. I might be able to dig something up about them that will set your mind at ease." While I very much doubted that last statement, I appreciated my uncle's offer anyway. I didn't realize it at the time, but I would wind up relying on his insights a lot more than I ever would have expected. I told my wife what my uncle had told me. Being a paranormal buff, she was immediately accepting of the news, if not a little put off by it. She even seemed a little bit jealous that I had been the one to see the girl. The only evidence she had of the spirit's existence was the chlorinated puddle of water that had been left behind. She half joked that she hoped she'd be the next one to see something paranormal, and acted as if that was for my sake, so she could carry some of the burden that our now home had bestowed upon us. It wouldn't be long before she regretted this wish. About 2 weeks passed without incident. We settled back into our home with the new knowledge that my uncle had given us. On the outside, not much had changed, but I could tell that we were both thinking about the little girl in the polka dot bathing suit, more than either of us wanted to admit. We talked about her a handful of times in those 2 weeks, more about who we thought she was in life, than about our brief experience with her in death. The more we thought about her, the more upset we became over the tragic end of the little girl that we had never met and not even known the name of. Eventually she would fade into the background, becoming just another number in the vast collection of visitors that we would gather throughout all of our years in this house. But for the time being, her presence was very much felt, and it felt incredibly raw. We could understand why so many people had moved out of this house throughout the decades. Even as paranormal enthusiasts, the weight of what we had experienced was significant, and we could only imagine how heavy it felt for others who wanted nothing to do with the ghostly interlopers that regularly found their way onto our property. And all of this was after only a single experience. But there were certainly many more to come. At the expiration of those 2 weeks, I heard my wife scream. I was cooking pasta in the kitchen, the hot pot in my mitted hands headed toward the strainer in the sink, when her terrified screech stabbed through the house like a stiletto, so shrill and horrific that I nearly scalded myself with the boiling water. I placed the pot back on the stove with as much haste as I dared to, and rushed toward the sound of her voice, calling her name and asking her if she was all right as I went. I found her in the second-floor bathroom, sitting curled up in the tub and sobbing so hard that I thought she was going to cause herself to asphyxiate right there beneath the dripping faucet. After crawling into the tub with her and comforting her for a minute or so, I managed to get her calm enough that she could tell me what had forced her into such a state. She had been cleaning the bathroom sink, her eyes focused on the bowl as she went to town with her trusty scrub brush, when she happened to look up into the mirror. Standing behind her, staring into the mirror, was a shirtless, middle-aged man, his face caked in a sickening mixture of shaving cream and blood. More of the red-hot liquid spurted from a deep, long wound in his throat, and she swore she could feel the blood's sticky warmth splashing against the back of her neck. When she turned around, he was already gone, but that didn't stop the banshee-like shriek from forcing its way out of her. She didn't remember climbing into the bathtub, but she must have raced toward it with primal expedience, where she then coiled up in fear until I arrived. We stayed in the tub for a long time after that, while she battled with her lungs to regain control of her breathing. Eventually, I helped her shaking, weak form climb out of the tub and walked her to our bedroom, where she rested for a while afterwards. No longer in the mood to eat, I threw my pasta in the trash and returned to the bathroom, where I finished her chores for her. While cleaning the sink, I noticed a small splotch of white shaving cream smeared upon the counter, which I promptly wiped away. I somehow managed to convince myself that it had been my own shaving cream, despite the fact that I had been growing a beard at the time and hadn't used the stuff in months. I reluctantly asked my uncle about the incident, and what he told me disturbed me enough that I decided I would not repeat it to my wife unless she asked me about it. To this day, she never has. My uncle told me that the man in question had recently been murdered by his wife. She had come up behind him while he was shaving, one of his old-school double-edged razors, blades hidden in her hand. She sliced open his throat before he even had a chance to realize what was happening. Now she was sitting in the local jail, while he was in the funeral home next door, waiting to be put to rest by his confused and devastated family. At the time, his wife had not provided a motive for the murder, and I never followed up with my uncle about it. I didn't see much good in knowing. Naturally, we discussed moving out after this. Oddly enough, my wife was the one who was more intent on staying in the house, despite her experience being significantly worse than mine was. "We've made a commitment to this house," she said, "and we're going to stick to it. There's no way we can let this place beat us that easily." She forced a smile. "Besides, both Mr. Grayson and your uncle said we don't have anything to worry about with these visitors. It's not like they can hurt us or anything." "Yeah," I said, "but they can scare you so badly that you wind up hiding in the bathtub." I was more surprised than anything else. I'm sure I won't react nearly that badly next time. My wife placed a reassuring hand on my forearm. "You don't need to worry about me. I'll be all right." "Are you sure?" I asked, unconvinced. She nodded. "Yeah, I can handle a few scares here and there if you can." I finally gave a smile back to her. It was mostly genuine. "Of course I can. It's going to take more than a few unexpected guests to scare me out of this place." And so we were in agreement, and the matter was settled. Years passed in that house. We raised a family together, a pair of beautiful daughters that became our entire world. All the while, we continued to be inconvenienced by our regular visitors. Sometimes weeks would go by where nothing paranormal happened, but other times we'd both have experiences for multiple days in a row. As it turned out, my wife had been right. She had never had as bad of a reaction as the one after the first incident. Some ghostly encounters were worse than others, but never once had we ever felt threatened by any of the presences in our home, or at least, not for a while. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. We eventually mustered the bravery to do as Mr. Grayson and my uncle had told us to, and encouraged any guests we encountered to leave. Like my uncle said, there were a few that ignored our urges and stuck around for a while after we had spoken to them, but most of them didn't put up a fight. The good ones did, as we instructed, usually disappearing with such little fuss that it often took us a little while to even realize that they had left. As our two daughters grew up, we taught them how to deal with the apparitions they encountered, and soon they would even begin telling us stories about the ghosts they vanquished throughout the house. My youngest once encountered an elderly woman in our garden when she was gathering peppers for her mother, and on the same day, our oldest came across a young boy around her age while she was pulling her bike out of the shed. Both of them encouraged the interlopers to move on, and both guests had listened without any complaint. I was oddly proud of my girls. It felt as if they had taken up the mantle of some old family tradition and were following in the well-trodden footsteps of their ancestors before them. Their experiences at home made them tough and difficult to frighten, and they eventually became minor celebrities at their school. Kids started coming over wanting to have paranormal experiences, and a few of them even did, or so they said. I suppose I'll never really know if they were being honest about their encounters. or if they were simply making up stories to tell their friends on the playground. But I guess it doesn't really matter. Not every visitor was the result of a recent death. As I said before, the funeral home is quite old, and some of its patrons over the decades, and even centuries, have chosen to stick around for much longer than they ever should have. Once, I was working under the hood of my car in the garage when I suddenly smelled cigarette smoke. I looked up and saw a man standing in front of my workbench, a lit cigarette drooping lazily in his mouth. He wore a white t-shirt, tucked into a pair of dark blue jeans, which were themselves cuffed over top his pair of worn work boots. His black hair was sturdily slicked back, and held in place with what looked to be a strong pomade, and was so dark and shiny that it was difficult to make out the thick layer of blood that caked the crown of his head. He was studying the bench, his arms planted against its surface, his profile facing me. "Looking for something?" I asked. He didn't turn to look at me when he responded. "You seen the monkey wrench, boss?" "No," I said, "and I think you ought to leave." "Oh," he said. "All right then." I turned my attention to my car, and when I looked in his direction again, he was gone. The smell of his burning cigarette lingered in the garage for the rest of the afternoon. There was a time one summer when my wife and I had some of our college friends over for a cookout. We had warned them that they might encounter one of our regular guests during their visit, but they all laughed it off and didn't think much of it. At night, we spent a few hours around a campfire in our backyard swapping stories, playing games, and just generally enjoying each other's company. The group initially consisted of 5 of us, my wife and me, along with our 3 friends. But at a point that I could not, and I still cannot discern, our number increased to 6. My wife was the first to notice him sitting in an empty space between 2 of our friends, and she subtly drew everybody's attention to him in the uneven light of the guttering fire. We could see his messy brown beard and matching hair beneath his brimmed hardy hat, as well as the Prussian blue jacket that adorned his upper body, and in the light of the flame, I could just barely make out that the jacket had been torn to shreds there. Our friends, too frightened to move, could only watch as the man in blue sitting between them leaned forward, pulled a metal flask from his hip and began to drink. The scent of whiskey cut through the burn of the campfire and drifted on the nighttime summer air as he drank, and in a few moments, the liquor that found its way to his stomach came pouring out of the tattered hole in his coat. The blue man slowly turned his head toward our friend, seeming to notice her for the first time. He raised the flask in his hand, presenting it to her. "Care for some?" Our friend, despite our earlier warning, was too petrified to respond, and so my wife spoke in her place. "No, thank you, and I think it's best that you move on." The blue man capped his flask, then followed up with a lethargic tip of his hat directed at nobody in particular. "All right." He went silent and turned his attention to the fire. The living members of our group did our best to carry on with the conversation as if he wasn't there, and eventually one of us noticed that our number had once again been reduced to 5, but the smell of whiskey remained for some time, and an inspection of the ground near where the blue man sat revealed that the dirt was wet with the jettisoned contents of his ruined stomach. Our friends stopped making fun of our ghost stories after that. None of them had visited our home since then. Considering the age of the funeral home, I don't think we'd ever had a guest that was older than the blue man. So you can imagine my surprise and confusion when only a few months later I encountered a Roman centurion with a bruised, swollen forehead in our basement. More baffling still was the fact that he spoke to me in English, and understood me when I told him it was time for him to leave. Everything made a lot more sense when my uncle informed me that, An especially intoxicated man had recently fallen to his death from a fourth-floor balcony during a Halloween party. He had apparently hit his head pretty hard when he landed. It is more important to reiterate that, of all the visitors mentioned up to this point, never made any of us feel unsafe outside of the occasional initial reaction of surprise or fright. And even then, the occurrences became so frequent that we weren't even startled by our guests half the time anymore. Any fear instilled in us faded not long after the visitors left, and the only returning guests we've had are the ones we failed to make leave during our first few encounters with them. But even these have all eventually passed on just the same as their predecessors had. This is all to say that not once have we ever experienced a presence in our home that we have not been able to handle. At least, not until that night. It happened the winter after our oldest daughter's first birthday. My wife had to stay late at work, which wasn't unheard of, especially back in those days. On nights like those, I'd handle getting our 1-year-old settled into bed before drifting off to sleep myself shortly after. But I'd always leave a few lights on for when my wife got home, one of them being the wall lamp in the upstairs hallway. I had just gotten our daughter to fall asleep and was in our bedroom, reading a book in bed while preparing to hit the hay, when I happened to look toward the open bedroom door and saw the apparition standing there. She was a little girl, similar in age to that first spirit I had seen standing at the top of the stairs all those years ago. Immediately upon seeing her, I knew that something was wrong. Her presence brought with it a disturbing chill that was uncharacteristic of any other spirits we'd encountered up to that point. Plenty of them had come with strange feelings or auras that sometimes manipulated the temperatures in the room, but none of them had ever had this level of intensity to them. It made all the hairs on my body stand up as if they had suddenly been frozen into an army of needling icicles. As we stared at each other, her in the doorway and me in the bed, I felt an overwhelming sense of terror latch onto me that I had never experienced before and hopefully will never experience again. The hallway behind her was black with an almighty darkness, which I knew should not have been possible, since I had left the light on for my wife, and I had seen its soft glow streaming into the room out of the corner of my eye while I was reading my book. As I noticed this powerful umbra, I realized that the overwhelming energy I felt was not coming from the girl, but rather from the presence that existed in the space beyond which light could reach. And as the understanding of a fresh, terrible danger continued to bubble up within me, something happened that stood in complete contrast to every ghostly encounter that I had experienced up to that point. The girl was the one to tell me that she needed to leave, and I knew that I needed to stop her from doing so. Something in my gut told me that whatever presence existed in the void beyond the doorway was beckoning for the girl to come to it, and I knew that I couldn't allow that to happen. I knew that for her to listen to that dreadful umbra would only result in her eternal doom. I was the only thing that stood between her and the certain damnation that awaited her just beyond the edge of that cataclysmic precipice. "No, I think you should stay here for a while," I said to her. Sitting up in my bed, I planted my bare feet on the chilly hardwood floor. Its cold touch steeled my nerves and fought back the cacophony of voices in my mind that screamed for me to let her leave. Let the umbra have her just so long as it would leave me alone. She seemed confused, or at least as confused as a ghost could be. "Are you sure? I really think I should leave now." Her voice sounded small, distant, and vulnerable, which only made me all the more protective of her. "I'm sure," I said. "Stay in this house for a bit, okay? You can even go play in our daughter's room for a little while. You'll like it in there. It's cozy, with lots of toys and big, soft pillows." "I don't know," she said, turning to look through the doorway toward the darkness. "My friend says he's going to take me to my parents. He says they're looking for me." Don't listen to him, I said. He's a stranger. You shouldn't talk to strangers. She paused as if hearing somebody speak. He says that you're a stranger. I know your parents, I said. It felt wrong to lie to her like that, but I knew I had to do anything I could to stop her from going with the presence in the hallway. They'll come to get you soon, but you have to stay here, okay? The girl remained silent for a long time while I barely so much as breathed from my spot on the bed. The room grew heavier, darker, and I found that my lungs soon struggled to take in air, as if they were freshly recovering from running a marathon. My forehead grew slick with sweat despite the chill that infested the room. My body began to burn and ache. Paradoxically, rather than escape the heat, I felt the almost uncontrollable need to crawl beneath the warm, safe covers and hide from the powerful umbra that seemed to be slowly sweeping into the room in the form of long, black, shadowy tendrils. I suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of defeat. I feared that the girl was going to follow the presence, and that she would quickly be lost to the unending darkness that so sweetly coaxed her from such an agonizingly short distance away. But soon, I noticed that the dark presence was beginning to recede, until finally the light in the hallway was able to once again pierce through the weakening gloom. The terrible chill fled from the room, and the dense miasma that had been suffocating me and draining the very will to live from my bones faded back into light, breathable air. Okay, she said. I'll stay. Good, I said. And let me know if he tries to talk to you again, okay? Okay, she said again. The girl stood staring at me for a spell while my nerves continued to strum all along my anxious body, like a mass of broken guitar strings. Reaching a shaking hand toward my nightstand, I picked up my book and forced myself to return to my reading in an attempt to calm myself down. When my body was once again my own, I looked back at the doorway. The girl was gone, and gentle lamplight bled in from the hall. Strangely enough, I was no longer worried for her. I somehow understood that whatever presence had wanted her had been thwarted that night, and that she was safe for the time being. The truth was confirmed to me when I saw her again a few weeks later, and with the umbratic presence absent, I finally told her that it was time for her to move on. When she vanished for the last time, I felt an inexplicable peace overwhelm me, and I started to cry. To this day, I don't know the extent of what the Umbra wanted with the girl, but I know now, as I did back then, that its intentions were nothing short of sinister. I still wonder what had caused that presence to specifically latch onto her, instead of the countless other souls that drifted through our home. But I could never muster the courage to research the entity or ask my uncle for more details about the girl's death. I debated not even telling my wife about this encounter, but ultimately decided that she needed to know. I stayed up until she got home that night, much to her confusion, and immediately told her what had happened. She remained quiet for a long while after that. Neither of us slept that night. It has been the better part of 2 decades since that incident. My youngest daughter just started high school, and my uncle retired from the police service going on 5 years ago now. Mr. Grayson still holds his funeral services next door. I saw him outside welcoming mourners just last week, and I try not to think about the fact that the old man looks like he hasn't aged a day since I met him. Countless guests have come in and gone in the years since that terrible night. But that dark presence has not returned. I don't know if it ever will, and I pray to God that I never have to feel what I felt that night again. More than that, though, I pray that my wife and daughters never have to experience what I went through on that night. If that shadow decides to show itself again, I just ask that it does so to me, and to me alone, because I'll be here, waiting for it, should it ever choose to make itself known. I already know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life in this house, ghosts and all. If they couldn't scare me away in those first few months, then they're stuck with me until the time comes that I join their ranks on the other side of that thin, translucent veil that we call death. And who knows? Maybe I'll wind up in the funeral home next door when my time finally comes, and I'll have the chance to pay this old house one last visit before I say goodbye.